Well, thank you very much. We are going to move next into our luncheon keynote speaker. I really want to make sure before we take that next step to thank the technical committees, all those who worked so hard on those papers, and the presenters who put a lot of years, if necessary, into the papers that have been presented. And to the awardees, congratulations on behalf of IEEE, AFCEA, and frankly, a security community that really benefits from your thought and research. Let's give them a hand, please. It really is a lot of moving parts in this Milcom event, and it's just great to see the recognition, due recognition provided. Our keynote speaker, as most recently, his command was up the road in Aberdeen and CECOM. Now he's the G6 United States Army, well known to AFCEA, well known to the information and signal communities, and has done a remarkable job in a variety of posts and stations, recognized for his leadership, his creative energy, and enthusiasm. If you could have just shared 5 minutes of what was at the front table here. He said he's already given his pitch to the three people sitting next to him, but truly engaged. It reminds me of our keynote yesterday, General Crowell, of looking at the Marine Corps and the problem set. I know that General Crawford has a similar perspective on the Army, really on land and land power and land forces, but also collectively joint. With a background from CECOM, he also understands the industry, those who are making and fielding and servicing systems, has perspectives across the board from software to data, to programs and now mission, certainly charged by the Army to perform that mission. He is the 14th commander. He was the 14th commander of CECOM, moved it along quite well. I didn't see General Taylor's in the audience, but what a great handoff between two great leaders. I know General Taylor will be with us today. He assumed the role of the Army Chief Information Officer, G6, August of 2017, leads the Army network modernization to deliver timely, trusted, and shared information for the Army and its mission partners. To hear him speak, really to watch him think about a problem, formulate it, and provide guidance, just reminds me how well our whole military has led, certainly the Army and the G6. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General Crawford to the stage.
All right, good afternoon. A lively crowd, that's what I'm talking about. All right, that was a long walk. Well, General Wood, thank you very much. I appreciate phenomenal job, and I really appreciate the warm welcome. As a matter of fact, I was sitting there. I started to drift off as you were talking because I was wondering who you were talking about. You know? If only my mom could be here to hear this. So it's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience today, as I did have an opportunity to talk to a couple of folks. And I can tell you up front, and I can say with great confidence that, so we're going to talk about a couple of things today in terms of the environment, in terms of where the Army is heading. And I look forward to your questions. But I can tell you, I can say with great confidence that like no other time in the 31 years that I've been blessed to wear the cloth of the nation, that your Army, and I say this to our industry partners and the members of the Joint Force, we really need our commercial industry partners. The investments and the seeds that you planted over the years, and I had an opportunity to actually give some thought to this as I was transitioning from the amazing team up at Aberdeen to the Pentagon. But the investments that you've made over the years are starting to bear fruit. But they're bearing fruit at a rate much faster than our current processes, the processes that we currently use, will allow us to harvest. However, it's this issue. the aforementioned, combined with recent directives from our leadership and some recent decisions from a Department of the Army and in some cases our DoD leadership, the evolution of the threat, which we'll talk a little bit about today because we've been paying very close attention to that, and the demands, and most importantly, demands of our warfighting customers that present what I'll call unprecedented opportunity to drive institutional change. Unprecedented. Haven't seen anything like this since I've been old enough in the Army to actually know what it was that I was looking at. So I believe that we've got unprecedented opportunity to drive institutional change. Before I get into what I actually came here to talk about, and if I'm lucky, and what you actually came here to hear, even though I'm a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I say that as I duck behind the podium here, because I know there are a couple of the purple folks that are out there, I'd like to pass on my congratulations to our gracious hosts in the charm city of Baltimore. What an amazing city for putting on yet another first-class event. I won't ask you to do many things, but I would ask for a loud and thunderous round of applause for the city for putting on this event. Now, those in the audience, and I know there's more than a few that actually know me, also know that I can never be mistaken for a historian. As a matter of fact, my wife reminded me of that this morning as I was leaving. But I'm told the nickname of the Charm City actually traces its origin back to 1975, back when I think General Wood was about 10 years old, if I remember correctly, and grew out of what was called creative conferences among four of the city's industry executives and creative directors. So no doubt, back then in 1975, they had vision. And it is that same vision that actually leads us here today for this discussion. To the idea of vision, I'd also be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to once again thank my old boss, who I know couldn't be here today, Lieutenant General retired Bob Shea, and Lieutenant General Bob Wood, our tremendous industry partners, and the entire AFCEA team for both the invitation and for their part over the last, I think it's 71 years now, of excellence in helping create the collaborative environment that I truly believe that is this forum and forums like this that happen all across the globe and all across the country that I truly believe are going to be the foundation in which we'll establish what we need to actually take advantage of the unprecedented opportunity that presents itself. The enduring relevance of this event and many others that bring together our very best and brightest have never been more critical. And ladies and gentlemen, I mean this from the heart, based on what we know about the current threat and about the challenges that lie ahead. But I don't believe they've ever been more critical. This relationship has ever been more critical than it is today. So when looking at this year's MILCOM agenda, and that's one of the things every time I speak, I always like to get a sneak peek at what was happening before and what was happening after, and what are they really doing, not just focusing on my contribution to it, but what are they actually doing. I immediately noticed the depth and breadth of the technical, the tactical, the operational, and strategic topics that you chose. The Internet of Things, and in my particular case, in the business that I'm in, wearing my G6 hat, the tactical Internet of Things, that's evolved over time. Wireless networking, we're paying very close to evolutionary technology and technologies in the area of wireless networking because we're looking at our command posts and how we can increase speed of setup and teardown and make them more mobile. The common operating environment is one of the areas that I know that you know that the Army is actually taking on with ASALT in the lead. And joint and coalition interoperability. Nobody here knows of any time when we've taken on a global challenge alone, as an Army or as a joint force. Everything that we do is going to involve our joint partners. So good on you for taking that on. Cloud, and so there's been a memo recently. Our Deputy Secretary of Defense actually, I want to say it was 13 September, if I remember correctly, actually put out a memo after a visit out to the West Coast and talking about how technology is now informing and changing the character of warfare, things like machine learning, et cetera. And so given that, he's given a directive to the force to now look to accelerate all the services look to accelerate their movements to the cloud. That's both unclassified and classified. And cyberspace operations and cybersecurity, I appreciate you taking that on. For what it's worth, a couple of thoughts. One thing that we've got to make sure that we do is that we've got a good understanding of the linkage between the two. So there's lots of discussion, and there's been amazing evolutionary capabilities developed when it comes to cyberspace operations. But what we've got to make sure that we do with our doctrine is we've got to make sure that we bring with it the linkage to what we're calling cybersecurity. And as the Chief Information Officer, that fits squarely in the cybersecurity piece, and the policy and strategy associated with that fits squarely in my portfolio. And so the bottom line here is the topics that you've been discussing, I believe in my heart of hearts, are inextricably linked to the number one priority of the United States Army, and that is readiness. So as we think about these issues we've been discussing over the past few years, and there have been many, as we were having a pretty lively discussion at the table there about how things change, but sometimes not so much in terms of the things that we've been looking at over the last 10 years. We find ourselves at a point few in the audience probably predicted that we'd actually be. Now, I know that many of you are thinking that we knew many years ago that there would be a point where we would be discussing acquisition reform. There would be a point where we were discussing policy constraints. There would be a point where we would have a more in-depth discussion about equipping challenges. But the point that I'm referencing has less to do with the difficult problems of the past, to be quite honest with you, and more to do with the idea of, again, opportunity. Simply put, what I'm discussing is what we plan to do about what we now know. It's not just the idea of knowing it, but what actions are we collectively going to take, and what are we going to actually do about what we now know? So over the years, and I can only speak for myself, but my assessment is we've been treating symptoms, but thanks to commercial industry, the test community, FFRDCs, and many others to include academia and feedback from operational commanders, we now know more about root cause and the impact of IT on the character of future warfare. Last October, in an article discussing the changing character of warfare, and I often reference this because it was pretty enlightening at the time, and he has since that time had additional discussions about this and shared additional thoughts on it. But our Army Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, shared that we have new insights into the character of future conflict, and we have had glimpses of what our Army and its soldiers must be ready to do in the coming decade. He further commented, and again I quote, that shifts in the character of war offer an opportunity. And if we can anticipate or at least recognize those opportunities, we can adapt proactively, maintaining or regaining overmatch, and forcing our competitors to react to us, vice us reacting to them. That said, I know that many of you are aware of the fact that over the last 12 months, our Army leadership, and that's the entire leadership of the United States Army, has been on a journey. And that journey has focused on a comprehensive assessment of our entire network, which included all 4 mission areas, what we commonly call the tactical, but the warfighting mission area, the intelligence mission area, the business mission area, and network mission area, and the enterprise network mission area. But given what I said about readiness being the number one priority of the United States Army, the start point of this journey was a clear-eyed and sobering assessment of the warfighting in our mission area and our tactical network. So after a year of assessment, and I've had the opportunity to have this discussion with some of you in small groups and large, but after a year of assessment, we've concluded that the Army's current tactical network will not meet the requirements of operational commanders in a highly contested and congested environment against what we're calling peer adversaries. After 12 months of assessing and about 7 months of deep dives, we've come to that conclusion. And to add clarity, the references to the tactical network involve both the upper and lower tactical internet. So this discussion is more than a discussion of just our transport capability. It's all of it. It's everything that we call the ecosystem, to include select mission command systems. So I'll tell you that the shifting threat landscape required us to look at, to relook and re-examine how we define our operational requirements, to immediately take steps to address our network shortfalls. And I know there's been discussion about we've been there before. We've seen these multiple attempts to kind of redirect and readdress. So we can talk about that some, during the Q&A if you'd like. I'll tell you that our network is too complex in terms of what we found. It's too fragile, and this is the entire ecosystem, and insufficiently mobile, lacks scalability, and is not expeditionary or interoperable with joint or interagency partners. And I know that last part is not news to this audience. The ecosystem that is our current network is subject to jamming, which is a major concern of ours. It's easy to detect, especially our command posts, and vulnerable to cyber attacks, and does not meet the size, weight, and power needs of the warfighter. And this is based on feedback that we have gotten, and it's consistent feedback over about a 24 to 36 month period, to include my time as the CCOM commander. So we further concluded that in our current state, the Army cannot acquire or rapidly integrate new technologies for the warfighter in a reasonable timeline or at a reasonable cost. And to add to this, not only can we not acquire new technology in our current state, but we're not postured to leverage commercial industry's innovation and investments in research and development. So that's a big statement, and that's a big issue. As your investments are going up and you're rolling out capability, not only are we not able and postured, able to leverage the technology that you're rolling out, in our current state, we're not postured to do so. So the pace of the fast-blowing winds of change in information technology is not reflected in the pace of modernization of the existing Army network. Instead, we innovate at a pace comparable to more conventional weapon systems by innovating at a pace comparable and that's needed for IT. Meanwhile, and this compounds the issue, U.S. adversaries can leverage commercial off-the-shelf technologies which allow them to gain and maintain an advantage. So additionally, the threat is real. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to better understand the current and evolving threats. But I will say to you that the threat is real. Over the past 16 years, rather than fight force on force, our peer adversaries have perfected TTPs like sensor-to-shooter capabilities. And some of the things that you read about, and I know many of you have taken a look at that in the Russia New Generation Warfare study and other studies. They've also perfected the rapid integration of cyber electronic warfare, cheap drones, and commercially available cell phone applications that, when combined with lethal fires, have the ability to decimate fixed command posts in static formations. And just to put things into context about this sensor-to-shooter development, TTPs. So we studied 16 different rotations to our National Training Center. And one of the things that came out of this, and there were several things that emanated, that came from it, but it had to do with the fact that it takes about, on average, after 16 different rotations, about 40 to 50 hours to bring up the tactical network. So an average, basically, you're talking 2 days, an average. Some did it faster, some did it slower, but an average of 2 days. So when you think about complexity, when you think about the urgency of now and why we need to do something now, this is happening at a time when our peer adversaries are perfecting their TTPs to go after our weaknesses. And this is one of them. So this idea of not taking action is not an option that the United States Army actually has. And so unless the Army finds a way to quickly reduce operational risk and integrate cutting-edge technologies into the network, as I've said before, adversaries will have and they'll maintain the advantage. So absent institutional change, our communications will become what I call an Achilles heel to the tactical. Instead of being a critical enabler absent institutional change is required to deliver the capability that our warfighters deserve, I believe we'll evolve to a point to where the network will become an Achilles heel, vice a critical enabler to the maneuver force and those that support the maneuver force. So the Army must be able to rapidly buy and integrate commercial off-the-shelf communications technologies developed by industry and already proven. There are technologies right now that exist in other formations, but we've got to be able to rapidly integrate technologies developed by industry and already proven by special operations forces, and to be quite honest with you, other DoD agencies are innovating, and others who operate basically outside the conventional procurement processes. We've got to figure out how to do what they're doing. Understanding that the output is different in many cases, but we've got to figure out how to capture the ideas that they have and integrate those quickly into our formations so that we can go faster and develop better capability. So, as I've said before, after action reviews from the closest thing to actual combat, the combat training centers, and these are AERs that come from all of our combat training centers, and technical assessments from the network integration evaluation validate the shortfalls and some of the feedback that we've been getting from actual combat. So our conclusions are corroborated also by the congressionally mandated Institute for Defense Analysis study. And ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, in March, when we started to review this, you can imagine the service's reaction the very first time that we actually saw the output of the IDA study. They made 12 recommendations that I can tell you were an eye-opener. And so up to that point, we were treating symptoms, as I said before, and what they gave us was a view into root cause of some of the things that we were seeing that were troublesome and were causing issues with operational commanders in the field. So what near-term actions? I've talked about some of the concerns with respect to the threat. And I think that I'm almost afraid to look behind me, but I think there's a chart back there. Somebody give me a head nod that there's a chart. All right, there is a chart that identified some of the other things that were brought out in the IDA study. And if you have questions on those, we can talk about those. But having said what I've said so far, so what near-term actions is the United States Army as a member of the joint team planning to take? So to address these operational shortfalls, the Army proposes to take the following actions. So first, halting programs that do not remedy the operational shortfalls that we've identified. And I will tell you, for the very first time when we start to talk about operational shortfalls, we spent a lot of time, a couple of months, actually thinking about, so what are the characteristics and attributes that we're really looking for in the network of the future? You know, what are the requirements? For the very first time, I had the question, what are the first principles of the Army's network? And so again, this isn't something that we just happened onto. There was a lot of thought into, a lot of intellectual investment into where we're going. And so the first step is halting programs that do not remedy operational shortfalls. The next step that we plan to take is, so I mentioned our need to be able to fight tonight. Based on the threat, based on our role and our contributions to the combatant commanders as a member of the joint team. And so given the shortfalls that I've mentioned, our top priority is we have to be able to fix our ability and remedy our ability to fight tonight. And so with priority going, and it's in this order, the survivability and mobility of our command posts. This is a major issue. A more resilient and unified transport layer, a universal suite of mission command systems, and last but certainly not least, interoperability and air-to-ground integration. And finally, after halting the programs that we do not believe meet our objective state, fixing portions of the network to ensure that we can fight tonight, the next step that we've got to take is we've got to pivot to something, and that something is a new acquisition strategy of what we're calling adapt and buy. It is akin to the buy, try, decide that you see with SOCOM. It is akin to other more agile acquisition processes and procurement processes that you've heard about, and I know many of you have read about. But what I'll tell you is it's fundamentally different from what we do today. And so some of the key attributes of what we're envisioning for the adapt and buy concept allows for the following. A more streamlined, soldier-informed way of developing requirements using empowered cross-functional teams and one source from training and doctrine command to develop requirements. You all are most of you and many of you are familiar with the way we develop requirements right now. In the past, so we've got centers of excellence. We have a center of excellence for fires. We have a center of excellence for maneuver. We have a center of excellence for mission command. We have a center of excellence for cyber, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the past, just to give you an example of this, back to the requirements piece, IT requirements came from all of those different centers of excellence. And so what the trade-out commander has done over the last 90 to 120 days is he's directed that IT requirements will come from one source, and that'll be the Mission Command Center of Excellence, empowered and enabled by the Cyber COE and the Signal School at Fort Gordon. So that alone doesn't fix the problem, but having one front door for IT requirements helps a lot with the horizontal integration that's required to get after this problem. So you're going to also see more experimentation and demonstration that informs a rapid insertion of new technology. And finally, increased resourcing flexibility. And so the thesis here with the resourcing flexibility is if we don't have the flexibility in the process to actually purchase technology, when it's available, we're not going to be able to leverage it. We'll just be waiting for the next year and the next year and the next year. And so this resourcing flexibility comes in the way of what we're calling a modern service line that better postures the Army to rapidly take advantage of new technologies when they become available by the old way and the old think of reacting to technology. So these steps are all designed to keep pace with technological advances, stay ahead of the threat, and enable readiness in our formations. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said many times over the past few years that we can accomplish nothing. All right, there is absolutely nothing that we can accomplish without the leadership, without the innovation, and without the intellectual curiosity of our industry and academic partners. That said, you may be asking yourselves, so what else can I do? First, I think you can play an active role in informing our capabilities development process. And this point is linked to the 9 October Acting Secretary of the Army announcement on the formation of cross-functional teams that will report directly to the Undersecretary of the Army and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. The purpose of these teams, and they are aligned along the 6 kind of priority areas for the Chief of Staff of the Army, of which the network is one of them. But the purpose of these teams is to improve the quality and speed of delivery of new material and capabilities to the warfighter. The cross-functional teams with membership from requirements, acquisition, S&T, test and evaluation, resourcing, contracting, and costing, and to include acquisition logisticians, are also chartered to leverage both industry and academia to help inform the capabilities development process. And this will be accomplished through centralized planning and decentralized execution. They will be empowered to execute this particular task, involving informed decisions based on research, based on doctrine, metrics, warfighter testing and feedback, leader development, and a streamlined acquisition process to, in the words of our Acting Secretary of the Army, and I quote, get the best return on investment for our soldiers. So secondly, I've probably spoken 3 or 4 times since 1 August when I got this job. There are kind of 3 things I ask of our industry partners. Every time that I come out, whether it's walking the floor and talking to small businesses at AUSA, and had a great time and great conversations doing that a week or so ago, there are really 3 things that I ask of industry to work with me on as your Chief Information Officer. The first one has to do with policy. So partner with us in articulating and identifying policy changes that prevent us from reaching that objective state that I just described. what policy changes. It's one thing if you have the military discussing policy that needs to change, but it's powerful when you have partnered and you enabled by and informed by feedback from your commercial industry partners on what policy needs to change to enable more agile and adaptive capabilities to be delivered to the warfighter. The second thing is we have got to institutionally figure out, and I am open to suggestions, but we have got to institutionally figure out how do we get you beyond the requirements. So we're going to take steps to streamline the requirements process. Right? And this is not just more of the same, people talking about it. What you're seeing now with the Secretary's announcement at AUSA, with a directive that he recently gave, that this is followed up with policy internal to the Army to try and get after the requirements piece. All right? But to that end, how do we get you past the requirements to better understand how the user interacts with your product? And so this is a team sport. And getting after this problem set. But you think of all the agile and adaptive companies that are out there, they understand exactly. I bet you Starbucks understands exactly how the user interfaces with their products. All right, pick a company. They do a very good job of knowing exactly what it is you want and more importantly, what it is that you need. And so how do I get you past the original requirement into a DevOps kind of environment where you are able to study and understand how the user interacts with the equipment? And then the last thing has to do with the art of the possible. I was having a conversation right before I took this job with a retired senior leader and who's been a great mentor, and we're having a discussion about the job. And I relayed to him that I really want to engage industry. I think, so there's been great discussions, but I see him as an untapped source almost, just based on some of the limitations that we have in terms of our processes. And what he relayed to me, and I'm relaying that back to you because I believe this, is that what we really need industry to do is to show us the art of the possible. What we really need to hear from our commercial industry partners, and there's work to be done on our side of this to make sure that we are availing ourselves for those discussions, that we do things that protect your intellectual property. And I learned a lot about that based on my last job. But what are the things that we can do that we can partner on to better enable you to show us the art of the possible? And so over the last 16 years of continuous combat, I'm convinced that the reason we have the network we have today is because, figuratively, we didn't have our sensors in the right places. We weren't able to know when the next iteration of technology was being developed and was available to integrate into our formations. I heard a very wise man say that recently, as we were having this network deep dive, he said that one of the reasons businesses typically don't do as well as they should, or in some cases fail, is they fail to anticipate strategic shifts in the marketplace. They fail to anticipate change in their particular environment. I'm of the opinion that the reason we have the network we have today, the interoperability challenges, the lack of mobility, et cetera, is because over the last 16 years, we bought capability as fast as we could to get it in the hands of soldiers because that was needed. But what we didn't have is the sensors in the right place to make sure that we were buying the latest and greatest. And so this idea of the art of the possible is linked to and nested with that think piece and that thought. So if you're looking to invest, and this is just, you can put this into the for what it's worth category. I'll start with technologies that reduce electromagnetic signatures of our command posts, allowing our forces to basically operate amongst the ambient noise that exists. And so the thinking of old was every box that exists in a TOC, we're going to go and we're going to try and work to reduce the electromagnetic signature of that box. The thinking of new is, what about the development of a technology that allows our command posts to just hide in plain sight, to hide amongst the ambient noise that currently exists? And so if I were thinking, offering a place to that areas that we're very, 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 three varies, all right, interested in, that would be one of them. One of the others is simplified capabilities to decrease the complexity of configuration and network management. A lot of the feedback from our soldiers, so we're dealing at a time when we probably got the best educated, best led force we've ever had. But what we've done is we've levied a heavy burden of integration into those formations. And one of those burdens of integration is the complexity of network management. Now, I understand I've got some significant architecture work that I've got to be doing and I've got to do, and that work is ongoing. That work started in earnest in March. And so Mr. Tom Sasala, who leads my architecture division, is taking that on. But being able to simplify capabilities to decrease the complexity of configuration and network management is another area of interest. And we had a great discussion, so I was blessed to be sitting at the table with the satellite gurus here from MilSatcom out on the West Coast here, and we had a good discussion about more resilient SATCOM waveforms. So when I talked about the threat, one of the biggest concerns, other than electronic warfare threats directly, and this idea of sensor-to-shooter capabilities that have been developed, is the lack of more resilient anti-jam capability when it comes to some of our SATCOM waveforms. And finally, accelerating the delivery of capabilities with options of lower power output modes. I know that the technology exists, and so what we've got to do is identify requirements, but what I'd really like to lean on industry for is back to the art of the possible in this particular space that has to do with power consumption and lower power, being able to operate at a lower power mode on the battlefield. So ladies and gentlemen, the unprecedented opportunity that I've been speaking of here today is grounded in the idea that collectively as a team, that we have an opportunity for redirect and deviation from status quo. We have an opportunity, and I'm not sure how long the window will be open, but we have an opportunity for redirect and deviation from status quo. To quote a very wise engineer that I've had the pleasure of working very closely with over the past 6 months, she said, we have the opportunity to untether ourselves from history and question the path forward. My response to that observation was, what we do with that opportunity has the potential to impact the lethality of the force for the next 20 to 30 years. So to all, in closing, I'd like to thank AFCEA, our industry partners, and the trusted professionals of our civilian workforce, and those joint teammates, and I know there are a couple here, past and present, who have continue to proudly wear the cloth of this great nation. After 16 years of continuous combat and supporting the Army as a part of the joint team, you've not only been a pillar of strength, but in times of great challenge, your dedication, your innovation, your determination have made a direct impact on the readiness of the Army. If I had to leave you with anything, I'd leave you with a couple of things to think about. First and foremost, that the last 25 years is a poor lens through which to predict the next 25 years. And secondly, and if you don't remember anything else that I said today, and I promise, if you don't remember anything else that I said today, I'd like to ask all in attendance and all who are watching what the Army's doing, resist the temptation of falling back to the thinking of old that got us in this position in the first place. Resist the temptation of demanding that here in 2017 that I should be able to tell you exactly what radio I'm going to buy in 2025. So I look forward to the questions from everyone today, if you have any. Again, I always take advantage of the opportunity, not just to get out of the Pentagon, but of the opportunity to engage our industry partners. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I truly believe in my heart of hearts, as I said before, that the first one to the whiteboard with the best idea wins. in the space that we are operating in, and we cannot get to those best ideas without the tremendous support from our industry partners. So thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity, sir, and I look forward to your question. Army strong.
Thank you, sir. The first question is, do you have thoughts on opportunities in the area of software development and management? Do we have the plans and strategies we need in this area?
So absolutely, I have a few thoughts. I gave up my software hat, I guess, that I used to wear when I was at CCOM. So I talked about how quickly we actually purchased equipment over the last 15 or 16 years. What happened right before our noses was the evolutionary, exponential growth in the software environment. What we didn't do, and one of the things that we've got to do now, and in my current role, I intend to take that on in working with Army Material Command, with ASALT on the acquisition side, is we have got to create unity of effort across the Army when it comes to software. Now, my thinking, I'll tell you, on this particular, and you hit on something I really want to talk about, so I appreciate whoever submitted that. It's been, we got a lot of coaching from then Lieutenant General Levy out at Hill Air Force Base, because about 3 years ago, the Air Force kind of came to a similar position in terms of needing to take action when it came to software. And so we've made, we had our first solarium. And as I told the team at the table here, if I'd have called it a software meeting, nobody would have shown up. So we called it a software solarium. And the first meeting had 188 people. The second meeting had almost 500 people back in February at Aberdeen. And that was intended, and this was not just inside the Army, it was across DOD. But what that was intended to do was to get all the pieces in front of us. Because again, this grew right under our nose, this idea of software-defined networking, software-defined radio. I even heard of a software-defined onesie the other day. All right, and so getting our minds around this idea of unity of effort is going to be a major priority for me as the Chief Information Officer. And this is not just about cost. There's roughly $3.2 billion that I believe is spent over the FIDIP, and I say roughly, on software. And so it's more than just reducing costs, but it's increasing effectiveness. Today, the delivery of patches, IAVA patches for our weapon systems is a 120-day process, whereby CCOM and other parts of ASALT work with the commercial vendor. They then turn that integration, that work with the commercial vendor into a patch, and then we do something magical. We build a disk, all right? And we put it in the mail, and then we pay somebody to go on the other side and actually load it onto our weapon systems. So out of this first software solarium, just to give you an idea of progress, what came out of that is, so first there was a light bulb that we shouldn't do that, given the evolution of the threat, but then there was the step back position of, so what can we do? Why can't we just leverage things like SCCM that we use on the commercial networks to push patches over the tactical network? And so we started on a path. Right now, I think there are about 35 different systems that we are patching, starting from a pilot of right about 12 months ago that we're patching over the tactical network. So more to follow. Absolutely, it's very important. As a matter of fact, I think it's absolutely critical that we move forward in creating unity of effort in the software space. So I think that there will be efficiencies to be gained. But more importantly, a lot of the complexity that we see in our formations has to do with the fact that I believe we had 17 different software baselines in the field running all at the same time. And what Gary Martin has us on a path now to go from 17 to 2. So great question. I appreciate whoever brought that up. More to follow out of me as your Chief Information Officer on where we're going with software. And trust me, industry will be a part of this discussion because you are a lot better at this than we are.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the top 2 needs that would enhance command and control within the joint forces?
From what I've seen, and had the opportunity to, I was recently in the Pacific and actually got an opportunity and honored and blessed to be the J6 in European Command a few years ago. But I think there's 3. And so I know that MP is on a path and that's work to be done. But in the near time, to enable our Fight Tonight capability, it's tactical voice, it's digital fires, and it's a common operational picture, or the things that come to me from our service component commanders, our corps commanders, our maneuver forces. And so we've got actually an exercise coming up in April where the Army plans to take on portions of this particular problem set to include our instantiation of MPE. And so obviously it's very important, but it's tactical voice, it's digital fires, and common operational picture.
Thank you. In the Army's near-term action of halting programs that don't work, are there risks or concerns that you have in doing away with some programs?
So anytime you do something new, there's always risk. But what we've done is, I mentioned clear-eyed and sober. This really was a sobering series of events that we undertook over the last 12 months, and in excruciating detail, down to the waveform level, over the past 7 or 8 months. And so, given what I said about 40 to 50 hours to initialize systems and bring the network up, when the requirement to move, we anticipate is going to be about every hour for a command post, I cannot ask a commander in the field to try and train your way out of this particular problem set. Because if they're really, really good, they get it down to a day, 24 hours. And I still have a gap of 23 hours worth of risk that we are assuming. And so the examination, again, there's always risk, but the examination was of the threat, of the path that we were on, of 4 very distinct courses of action, one of which was status quo. And we came to the conclusion that, back to this discussion about the urgency of now, that this is not something that could wait. That seeing ourselves and taking action to better posture the Army to leverage your investments to put the very best capability that we can in the hands of our soldiers was the right thing to do. And so absolutely there's risk, but what I will tell you is we've assessed that risk. And the risk of staying on the path we are on is, in my mind, greater than the risk of taking a different path.
Thank you. Going back to your comments about working with industry, can you share some specific ways that industry can support your stated needs in the tactical, intelligence, and mission command areas?
Yeah, and so I think so the things that I mentioned about policy, I know if you want to stop a crowd, mention the word policy, and it'll stop them. It'll stop right in place, because there are always different interpretations of different things. And so working with us, again, I come back to that because that is what enables us to be more agile, so that then we can work more with you. Or it enables us to be more agile so that we can better take advantage of the capabilities that you are developing. And so teaming on what policy needs to change is probably one of the most important things that you can do. And the second thing had to do with what I mentioned about, we have got to get you past requirements. I really want you to understand the back and forth between your equipment and the user, because the delta between your equipment and the user is what ends up turning into complexity in our formations.
That was our final question for General Crawford. Please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood back to the stage to formally thank General Crawford.
Well, thank you, General Crawford, very much for a presentation You know, it makes me think about the idea of opportunities and just what kind of leader you put in place to capture those opportunities. With a background in warfighting, operations, unit level, division level, corps level, then an understanding of acquisition and procurement and maintenance and sustainment. And oh, by the way, you know, swims well in the Pentagon. So General Crawford, great man, right person for the job you described. Let's give him another hand. And you know, he laid out the opportunities in terms that I think would be very interesting to both the academic side of our audience and the industry side of our audience. And these are long-term challenges and possibly long-term opportunities for you as well. So hopefully the notes were taken, but we have it on video and you can watch it on our YouTube channel, so you'll have all of this in record. We're happy that we can have General Crawford with us. We're happy we can have you with us. We're going to spend a little bit more time before we head on out to the floor. I just wanted to orient you a bit on the remainder of the day. We have the technical program in front of us. I'll take a quick moment to talk about that. Without our technical program, we won't get to those answers in the long term. I'd also like to recognize, though, before we release, some very important people in the audience, very important actors in our ecosystem, and that's our sponsors. Our sponsors who allow us to host these sorts of events and bring this kind of community together. I'd like to thank Raytheon, represented today by Bill Iannucci, Internal Communication Systems Business Development Executive, is with us. The MITRE Corporation, represented today by Lucinda Spaney, Director in the MITRE Corporation's DoD FFRDC National Security Engineering Center. SafeLogic, represented by Doug Rossi, Vice President of Partnerships. And Wolfspeed, represented today by Richie Richards, Program Manager of RF Foundry Services. And we're glad that you're with us. I'm glad you've sponsored very much so and that you have a presence here in the program. Let's give our sponsors a hand, please. Okay, good afternoon ahead of us. We have a dessert break right after this on the exhibit floor. During the break, we'll also be starting our new sessions on the two theaters. Our Milcom Theater at 2 o'clock will present Protected SATCOM Future, Contractor View. We know how really standing room only that first SATCOM presentation was this morning. So get your seats early. We'll do our best to maybe get a couple extra chairs, but it's still going to be pretty packed. The Team APG, equally packed. This one's going to be on the Internet Battlefield of Things. Internet Battlefield of Things, taking it down to an operational focus. The technical program continues to run from 2 till 5 today. This includes paper presentations, tutorials, and technical panels, all in the meeting rooms you're familiar with up on the 300 level of the Convention Center. Our afternoon plenary panel session, which is around the corner in the plenary space, no doubt with the participants and the subject at hand, as good, as interesting, and as important as this morning's, is accelerating the speed to solutions in the federal IT. You heard General Crawford address that as a priority area. It'll be held in the panel area in Hall B from 3:30 to 5. And finally, on your app, there's a survey instrument. If you have a chance, please give us feedback, give us return. We do everything we can to read and heed those survey comments. So ladies and gentlemen, that concludes breakfast, lunch. I appreciate you being here with us, and I offer you dessert on the floor for breakfast. Thank you.